Sweet. And then we'll do that. Awesome. Okay, well, hi friends. Welcome to Bertrand Russell's introduction, or his outline to philosophy. It's a relatively short book. It's an overview book. It's not terribly technical. It's not terribly hard to read or anything like that. If you guys have encountered Russell before in any classes or stuff like that, but very, very generally, I guess Bertrand Russell was just like a British logician, a British philosopher. You could also even call him like an activist. He you could call him a bunch of things because it wasn't just like a philosophy type of career he was pursuing, but he's one of the titans of analytic philosophy. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying one of the founders of analytic philosophy, but I will call him a titan for sure. From him, we got almost all contemporary traditions in philosophy, or all contemporary work-throughs, or the way we think, basically. The way we think in analytic philosophy or in Western philosophy nowadays is attributed completely, or at least in large part, to him and then G.E. Moore, one of his friends, one of his buddies.
They were actually roommates in college.
They were roomies. And I don't know if you know some other names in philosophy. He was the teacher or the PhD advisor to Wittgenstein. They ended up having a falling out later down the road, but he was just like an absolute titan in analytic philosophy. And I want to do my best to explain or walk through what analytic philosophy kind of is, because it is a weird like term or thing. Like, people say it. One second. Can you guys see the slides, or like just the PowerPoint thing? Change windows. Wait, there we go.
So you can see the slides now.
Okay, cool. Sweet, yeah. But yeah, I want to try and do this whole idea of analytic philosophy. I want to do it justice, because I don't know, when most people think about philosophy, they just think it's like a little more fluffy, like a little more like thinking about what the meaning of life is and all that stuff, but it's, in some schools, or in the analytic school, it's a lot more rigid and structured and logical. It's formal, it's proper, and I kind of want to like walk through what Bertrand Russell's whole goal was when he was talking about philosophy and engaging with it, and just being like someone who wanted to demonstrate or talk about philosophy. So his whole goal, I guess, was to he wanted to clarify and systematize philosophical issues. His target reader, or his target audience, wasn't maybe like the general public, but more like an educated group. I don't want to say an academic group, but I do want to say like an educated group of people, like people who wanted to know more, who wanted to learn, who wanted to think about stuff. He was tailoring all of his works to these people, and he wanted to clarify he wanted to make it clear certain philosophical issues or certain philosophical concepts. So he wanted to structure everything in terms of logic, or in terms of being able to talk about something with absolute clarity, and not with ambiguity, not with vagueness, not with interpretation. He wanted to tailor everything to systematization and analysis. And analytic philosophy is kind of where it gets that name from, I guess. He started off with logic. He was a mathematician, I believe. He started off in mathematics, but he thought that there were certain axioms in mathematics that people were taking for granted, or at least in Euclidean mathematics or Euclidean geometry. That was his first introduction to this world of logic and stuff. And he thought that there were certain axioms, certain rules, certain laws that were being taken for granted. His whole goal then, and as we'll get on to reading and go through his books and stuff, or through his book, we'll see that he's just trying to like demystify philosophy. He's trying to make it proper and rigorous. He's trying to make it like A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, like very like systematic. I don't know. A different way of thinking than has been originally thought. If you've read other people, there's also some like echoes of Hume. I feel like when I read Russell. So, yeah. He wanted to clarify all of the concepts in philosophy. He wanted to eliminate confusion, eliminate ambiguity, eliminate interpretation. Wait, can you guys see my slides or not? Are you still on the introduction slide?
No, we could see the slides.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so like one example that he talks about is a statement like the king of France is bald, right? So saying something like the king of France is bald it's a pretty loaded statement metaphysically, because you're uttering into existence something that doesn't ontologically exist. So you're saying that there's this type of like existence, this thing that you're uttering. You're saying the king of France is bald, like this type of subject, this type of being that doesn't exist. You're uttering it into existence. And it's difficult to import meaningfulness, at least existential meaningfulness, to certain statements like that when they don't have a real world connection, real world directness. Like there isn't a bald king of France, but we're uttering him into existence in one weird way or form. So we just wanted to illustrate there's a lot of issues that come into importing existence or importing ontological certainty to certain statements or to certain linguistic things when we talk about them. He wanted to clarify all of philosophy. Is basically what I'm trying to get at. One of the big domains he tries to tackle is metaphysics, right? So the nature of reality, physics, as in what's real, and then meta as in the nature of what's real, or something like that, if you want to translate it. He makes a big distinction, or one of his like big arguments. He makes a distinction between sense data and external objects. So he was big on this idea of us understanding the world, us coming to knowledge through our senses. The way we learn, the way we understand stuff is through our senses. We can understand the concept of an apple because we can see and touch that apple. We can understand the concept of, I don't know, beauty because we can see beauty and understand it and touch beauty. So all of these things, he thought that we came to knowledge, we came to understanding stuff through sense data, or what do you call it, sense data. He thought that the traditional school, or the school at the time of metaphysics, was way too speculative. It was talking about like Pegasuses and possible objects and imaginary numbers and all of these things that we cannot see in the real world, and we can't really talk about them. So that got fluffy for him. He didn't like that. One example he kind of gives is that like you can have a table. The nature of the table is certain and for sure. However, depending on how we observe it, how we look at it, how we see it, it can change. We need to distinguish objective reality we need to make the distinction between objective reality and how we perceive reality. There's a difference there, and we need to understand that if we want to come to any type of like logical truths or understanding stuff, basically. He was all about, you can call it like scientific realism, you can call it empiricism, you can call it stuff like that. And he thought that the only way to understand the world was through measurement and empirical accounts, verifying stuff, basically. I kind of already alluded to this, but his theory of knowledge, or his way of understanding the world, the way we can like know stuff, I want to say, he thinks that the only way we can the primary way we can know stuff is just through sense data, through observation and stuff like that. So it's only through measurement and objective analysis, objective positions, that we can understand stuff or come to know stuff. To say that we know stuff means that we've empirically looked at it, empirically understood it. But oops, I just totally like crashed into my table. That was only one aspect of Russell, if we're just talking about him as like a philosopher, because yes, he was entrenched in academia and entrenched in logic and all of these types of things, but he was also very involved in the political and social sphere. So he was a big advocate of of I don't want to say utilitarianism, but I do want to say of consequentialism, or of like kind of thinking about morality in terms of what the outcome would be, right? As opposed to common thought like Kant would put out, or like these like rules, these like laws of nature. It was more so about like what are the consequences, what are the outcomes of certain decisions, certain actions. So he was very involved politically in that sense, right? That he wanted the best possible outcomes for people, um, and he talks a lot about that. Obviously, like during the time he was growing up, or he was living, there was world wars going on and issues with like Soviet Russia, issues with Germany, um, and just like a lot of stuff, yeah, that he was talking about actively, very very actively, and engaging in, basically. So he criticized moral absolutism. He didn't like that. He didn't like the idea of there being some sort of like rigid rules morally, but he did like his rigid rules when it came when it came to logic. That's like it's a weird characteristic, or a weird attribute of Russell, in my opinion. Yeah. So yeah, so he was super anti atomic bombs. He wrote a paper, or some sort of like thing with Albert Einstein, advocating for the abolition, or removal of atom bombs at the time. He saw them as just like an absolute parasite to humanity. Let's call it that. So he was a big advocate for like just getting rid of these types of like killing tools, because he was very political and he was an activist, I want to call him, or at least like from what I know about him. He obviously, or not obviously, but I talked about this before the recording started. He was one of the teachers of Ludwig Wittgenstein, and also Karl Popper, a little lesser known, but also still like a big name in philosophy. Yeah, and he saw Wittgenstein as like this beautiful mind, and he wanted Wittgenstein to continue with these projects and continue with this stuff, after he passed. But they had a falling out, especially after Wittgenstein wrote his Tractatus, which was like a super famous book at the time about language and stuff like that. They had a falling out, and then I don't think they talked to each other after their studies at university. I believe it was Cambridge, but I might be wrong. But over there, yeah, they had a falling out, and they never talked to each other again. He was, you could call him like a skeptic in the term, like in a Humean sense, I would almost want to say. So he was always questioning the axioms of logic, the rules of logic. Why is there the law of non-contradiction? How does that work? Why is 1 + 1 2? Can it ever be 1 + 1 = 2? Whoa, Ori, do you want to butt in?
I mean, you can go on, but I think calling him Humean really negates his entire project, because he wants to be this direct realist. And he's not necessarily skeptical of much. He just thinks that it's this, we have to commit ourselves to this progressive inquiry. That doesn't mean that he doesn't think that philosophy, science, and logic, anything not directly empirical, aren't things that exist, like Hume.
Would you not say though that he's skeptical about the laws of logic, or the nature of logic, because that's where his whole project begins?
I would more so argue that
Icarus, would you like to say something? Sorry.
I think he was being more skeptic about theology in general, like the religious dogma that existed during those days.
Yeah, that too. very questioning. But continue, Ori. Yeah.
If you're referring to his essay, "Why Am I a Christian?" That's one of his later works. But I think in the very beginning, he was more so questioning logic and predication. He said to think that, one of his early projects was on numbers, right? And he thought that while we could attribute sets to numbers, or numbers were these kinds of set things, they're these set existences, numbers themselves aren't contained in the set. Like the number 4 itself doesn't seem to be contained within the set of all things that are 4. And so he more so is attempting to clarify, but I wouldn't call him skeptic, because skeptic really puts this idea on him that's like he doesn't believe we can have knowledge of a specific notion, or of something within a specific domain. And I mean, Hume undeniably would be a skeptic under that definition, but I don't think we could consider
like if we're thinking about Hume, he also would. I don't think he would ever call himself a skeptic for sure. He, like, all of his writings, it's littered with skepticism. But I don't think he'd call himself a skeptic. He'd just be a skeptical person, and I think a skeptical person is just someone who doubts what you know, like who doubts what you can come to know. And I think that's kind of what Bertrand Russell. That's the reason he engaged. He like went at all of his projects, or all of his ideas. It was because he didn't want to take the axioms for granted. He didn't want to take the logical principles that everyone understood for granted. And that's being kind of skeptical to me. I don't know, like, that's the connotation that the word skeptical has, to my mind, in a non,
I guess,
terminological sense. You know? I don't know.
Hume through
I think you're cutting out. You're cutting out, dog. I can't hear you. Oh no, you went in a tunnel or something. Unfortunate. Oh wait, no, I can hear you now. Go for it. Okay, no. I guess I'll just continue. Don't know if I can totally hear you now, or if other people can hear you. But yeah, where was I? I was kind of making the claim that Russell strikes me a little bit as like a skeptic, not in a strict sense, but as in someone who doubts all of the axioms that were already being used in maths and in logic. And yeah, I was referencing that, like, his brother introduced him to Euclidean geometry at one point, and it was because of this introduction to Euclidean geometry that he was like, whoa, why are we just accepting these premises as true? Let's investigate a little bit more. Let's look into it a little bit more. So that was kind of, I don't know, that's the impression he has on me, as someone who's always questioning the fundamental rules of logic and of analysis. But I guess that point is up for argument. I'm definitely not a Russell scholar, or I haven't read much of Russell's stuff or anything like that. But he was a proponent of, as I was kind of mentioning, this empiricism, and of what's also called logical positivism. And he thought that he didn't want to include empirical aspects to what it means to be a person, or what it means to experience stuff. Aesthetic and ethics should be a little bit separated and a little bit different than pure logic or rigorous logic. So that strikes people as very off-putting. Ethical relativism or just not having absolute truths, not having absolute rules, that was a very contentious position to hold, or a very contentious thing to have, especially at the time, given the grip that the church, to some extent, it's still pretty relevant, but at the time, the grip that the church had on the public, or just on the population of England at the time. To say that things ethically or morally could be relative in any sense of that word, however you want to stretch it or look at that's just like blasphemous almost, right? So he was a big topic of controversy. To say that something can be right over here and wrong over there rubs people the wrong way, especially those who are dogmatic in their beliefs, right? Or people who have like rigid laws and morals that it's always wrong to kill, basically. Some like a statement like that would be totally accepted. But ethical relativism says, well, depending on this, depending on that, there's like exceptions and stuff like that, which seems very off-putting at the time to a lot of people. So he's a heated there's a heated topic socially when it comes to like his views and like how public he was about these views. Yeah, he wanted to, or there was a big debate, and I think he got fired from a certain position in academia at one time because of this, because it was hard for people to say when we should apply his rigorous philosophy and when we should not apply his rigorous philosophy. And when it comes to social issues or moral issues, it gets fluffy, it gets fuzzy, to say the least. What else do I have to say about Russell? Well, basically nothing. These were just the slides I was going off. But I don't know. That's all I kind of have to say about Russell, and I'm sure I missed out a ton. I did not overview the book very, very well, or how it's structured, but as Ori was mentioning, it's very compartmentalized, right? So it's like you can open it up at any page, basically, or at like any chapter, and start reading. It's not like this progression, not like the Confessions we were reading before, that you need to like have prior knowledge or historical knowledge or anything like that. It's very pick up and read. That's all I have to say about Russell. Go ahead and close this now. What do you guys think, Ori?
Am I back?
You're back, yeah.
Oh, word. Yeah, I think that his skepticism was a more so. The reason I'm like anti-calling it a Humean skepticism is because Hume denied that we could have knowledge beyond two specific things, and I don't think that Russell would deny knowledge. He would more so deny it if it's not refined. That's why he was skeptic of Euclidean geometry in the very beginning, because it's something that was established thousands of years prior, and in all the other sciences, or in every other STEM field, I should say, things have progressed over time. Why does math have this specific ability to just uphold its truths forever, right?
It's
so
timeless,
he's saying, so he's not denying that there are timeless axioms for math. It's more so he's saying that we need to make sure they are refined. We need to further refine them and make sure those axioms are actually axioms.
No, you cut out. Ori, come back. You cut out. These axioms were actually axioms, yeah. That's what I would wanna... I'd say that too, I'd agree completely. It's like, we take that to... For your back. Continue.
I said a very good example of this timelessness was his approach to set theory. What is set theory? it's a branch of mathematics that I guess deals with abstract or attempts to make empirical things abstract. A good example of something easy in set theory is take all things that are of 4. I have 4 pencils in my hand. That is contained within the set of all groups with the cardinality of 4. And he had trouble with this because he thought that in set theory, in original set theory, there's this idea that all sets can contain themselves. And that didn't make sense to him because if I were to say that the number 4 is the set of all things that are 4, and the number 4 is also a empirical thing contained within the set of all 4s. But that, he wanted to challenge that because it doesn't seem like an abstract entity can be empirical and vice versa. So that's kind of what I mean is by his him not being so skeptical, but more so this mathematician who wants to refine these subjects.
No, yeah, I get that. I can see that. He was a refiner of sorts. Yeah.
The crudest way to say it, yeah.
A refiner of sorts.
But I also don't think that he would. I think he's a weird kind of empiricist too, where you can't solely classify him as strictly empirical, because of his idea of universals or concepts, right? While they might begin similarly to Plato within the empirical world, we still do have these things that are non-empirical, that we have knowledge of, that we try to define, right? And I guess this is a little tangent on his correspondence theory of truth, which just basically says, sort of briefly, is that a statement is true if and only if it corresponds to reality or a specific empirical state of affairs. And that's kind of his attempt to branch abstract things, in this case linguistically, to the empirical world. Because it wouldn't be really hard for him to say that truth itself is solely empirical, because it has to do with abstract conceptions such as sentences and statements. But easy example is the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America was signed on July 4th, 1776. Now, that statement to Russell would be true because it corresponds to the reality that we live in, because of the fact that the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, rather than something like the independence was signed on July 10th, 2002. That wouldn't make sense to him. Or it would be false for him because it doesn't correspond to reality.
Yeah, the way I think about it, and it might be like a misleading way to understand his train of thought, or like the way he's thinking about this stuff, but like the way I think about it is that he considers a proposition true, or something, he considers something to be true if it has an ontological correlate, or like something out there in the actual world that happened, that mimics the statement that you just made. If that's the case, then it is a true thing. If it's different, so it's the Declaration of Independence was written up in a day that wasn't the case, or the King of France is bald, right, or something like that. then it is a false statement. We shouldn't talk about it. That's how I understand him. But I don't know. I'm not too read on Russell. I'm not too confident on my views of him or on how I understand it.
I mean, I think you're right so far. You know, something like Pegasus, like you brought up earlier, he would say that it's a lot harder when you get into his theory of meaning and reference. But we can't refer to something such as Pegasus because it's not something in the world.
That's weird to me, though.
And
that's weird to me because you say we can't refer to Pegasus, but we just did. We just talked about Pegasus. How can we not be able to refer to something but still talk about it? That's what
I think he would try to get around that by saying something like, you're creating a name for something that has the quality of a horse with wings. And this concept, Pegasus, should really just be called a horse with wings. We're referring to something that we already know. We're not referring to something that doesn't exist. So that's like maybe how he would attempt to get around it. And that way you wouldn't run into that issue as much. But a big contention in scholarship with correspondence theory is that it's really hard to actually define correspondence. Is it a relationship? What kind of thing is correspondence? And that's kind of something that I've always been wondering, because does that mean that only empirical things exist? That would kind of go against his view of numbers and mathematics, because he refuses to call the number 4 empirical. He thinks instances of it are denoted in empirical reality, but he would never say that number 4 itself is empirical. So it seems to me like his theory of mathematics is actually against his theory of truth.
It's just odd to me to say or to think. Maybe I'm just being a grumpy old philosopher, but it seems weird for me to say that, like, when I say Pegasus, what I'm really saying is a horse with wings. So they seem like different things. That's what it strikes me, at least, and I'm not satisfied. And I think Carnap or Kripke or Carnap, I don't know, one of those metaphysicians, they tried to explain it, but I'm not satisfied with that. It's just weird that, or Harry Potter or Superman, any of these like things, we're referencing them, but they don't exist. How can it be the case that stuff can be non-empirical and discussed? That's just.
I agree. And I think Hillary Putnam has an interesting answer to this question that I need to do a little bit more research on. But he says something like, we shouldn't give the same standards of truth to empirical truths, mathematical truths, metaphysical truths, abstract truths. They're different kinds of things, so they should have different requisites to be something that is true.
That's very satisfying. That's very satisfying as an answer to me.
I agree. I'm very fond of it, because that would allow us to kind of get rid of this differentiation between, I guess, nominalists, fictionalists, and Platonists. I guess just in the sense of people who don't believe there are abstract entities because all they can perceive is empirical reality, or maybe something non-empirical seems a bit too mystical for them, or something of that sort, right? And I think that we'll have to read Outline of Philosophy to really understand what Russell is saying. But he starts off with a bang. In his very first about 20 pages, it's all about philosophical doubts, and not in the Cartesian sense. He thinks Descartes made a mistake. in the sense that we should just start with this I think, because a lot more happens before we think, and that's, as you were saying, sense data. We think about sense data. So I think slowly but surely we might get to understand why Russell says the things he does, and why he was such a heavy hitter, and this founder of analytic philosophy.
Yeah, I think there's this, like, when it comes to Russell at least, the foundation, the ground, things that genuinely can be either true or false in, like, the most concrete ways. Those are the rules of logic, or those are logical things. 2 plus 2 does always equal 4, truth, value, 100%. But when you kind of get away from that, when you get into, like, linguistics, or when you get into, like, metaphysics, statements, hypotheticals, then things, it's no longer like a true or false thing. It's like, it's more true or less true, or more false or less false. That's
Similarly, sorry, go ahead.
No, continue.
I was saying, so in response to, the issue that you just brought up, a little bit more contemporary analytic philosophy has developed this thing called this probability theory of truth, right? If something is, if one's familiar with probability theory, then the number 0 would be absolutely false. The number 1 would be absolutely true. And that would kind of relate to this binary that we have of true and false. But the probability theorists actually deny that it can only be true or false. They think we should look at the world in a probabilistic sense. It is more probable that I will go to my class tomorrow than not go to my class tomorrow, because with all the sense data that I have currently, it doesn't seem like I'm going to be one to miss my class.
It's just weird for me to say that. It's weird to say that. That's like a hypothetical in the future. Like, will I go to class? We can apply probability theory pretty easily. Whether or not you went to class, like a past statement. It's like, did you go to class? Yes or no. There is a clear answer there. Unless you were standing in the hallway in the doorway and half of you was in, half of you was out. Like, no, you were either in class or not, and that strikes me as a truth. It has to have a truth value, like a definitive truth value.
Interestingly enough, Russell does deal with this in his theory of statements. He actually says that there are exceptional cases of statements that we can't call true or false yet, and some of these exceptional cases refer to future statements about the future. He usually understands statements to not be created, or not be, I can't make a statement true or false. It will already be true or false before I know what the value of it is. However, he says, I do have the power to make it true or false in the case of a future statement. I have the power to catch the train in 15 minutes. An event that I do, an action that I do, will make a statement true or false. I will catch the train in 15 minutes. We don't know the answer to that yet, but I have the power to make it a true statement. And that's different than other kinds of statements for him. Saying something like the Declaration of Independence example is completely different, because that's something in the past, an empirical reality that we can state true statements about.
Russell was one of those individuals where I get a feeling that his brilliance, he's always trying to explain it to, like, common people or common folk, and a little bit of the meaning gets lost of what he actually means, or what he actually wants to say. And that's just like an unfortunate thing of being, I don't know, some sort of wizard, some sort of genius. I feel like
earlier when you...
Sorry, yeah.
I was saying that earlier when you were speaking of him as a political activist. I think that it would have been also cool to mention that he actually won the Nobel Peace Prize for humanism because of his
Literature, yeah.
pacifist. Yeah, and he decided, like, the reason he went to jail was because he was a pacifist. And you know, in World War I, you know, one of the bloodiest wars to ever exist, that was looked down upon by governments. And that's interesting because that means he would have been writing some of these brilliant works while in prison, and surrounded by a kind of school of thought that would have been a massive shift from where he's usually at, right? He's usually in these academic areas, and then going to a prison would have been a big change of for him. So I wonder if that really affected how he write about specific issues.
Yeah, how he communicated. That's why I give him so much credit or so much esteem. I think of him very, very highly because he has those two sides to him. He has the academic, rigorous, analytic side, great at math, smarty pants. But he was also a human in like the most general senses or general terms. He had like a very human life, let's call it, like a very human life. He had like 4 wives or something like that. But he was and he'd be sent to jail and go to protests, and I don't know, he's like a very you don't oftentimes come across someone who is so analytic and rigorous and logical, but at the same time human and ethical. And that just strikes me as very, I don't know, like important to note. Like that's what I like about him a lot. Yeah. It's not like a lot of contemporary metaphysicians or contemporary analytic philosophers that just, they're smarty pants, right? But they don't do much else than that. I wanted to say something else, but I forgot. Oh yeah, on Christianity and stuff. I watched he had a very cool talk about Christianity. And he characterized Christianity in these 2 terms. It's like to call yourself a Christian, you need 2. 1, believe in an afterlife. 2, believe in a God. And then 3, something about dogma. I don't know. Ori, do you know what he said about Christianity?
I actually don't. That was one of his like bigger later issues because, you know, in the very beginning, a lot of his views were sense data, very empirical. So he didn't want to really say too much. But then once he got big, he finally thought that he could come out and talk about being non-Christian and whatnot because, you know, only in, I guess, this recent 20th century was it almost acceptable, or becoming more acceptable to be non-religious and secular. But I wanted to say something about analytic philosophers being these, I guess, it's awkward to watch them be down to earth. I think that we need to remember philosophers are human too, you know? Philosophers are also the kinds of people that we are. We party in college, we drink, we smoke, we're just people who want to think about problems. We're not better than regular people. And I think many analytic philosophers actually view it that same way. There was a analytic philosopher who came right after Russell named A.J. Ayer, and besides philosophy, I mean, he was known for being the womanizer. He, so I think we need to remember that all these philosophers have a human side.
Yeah, it's weird. You think about philosophers like these like beacons of knowledge, but really it's just a dude. It's just some guy.
Yeah.
It's some guy with his issues, like
Yes.
wondering what he's gonna eat for dinner. Like,
No, exactly. So I like it when we kind of remember, hold on, these people are probably a lot more down to earth than we think they are.
mm-hmm.
And if you've ever, I should say that if people are having trouble reading analytic philosophy, what helped me is watching a video of an analytic philosopher and understanding how they talk. You know, it almost sounds like they're yelling at you when you're reading them, but then you go and you watch a video of an analytic philosopher talk, and they talk really slow, like like your grandpa who's just kind of trying to get a sentence across. They're not here yelling at you and saying, no, this is how it has to be done. Do it logically like this. No, they're talking calmly and slowly. And sometimes they have giggles in between their laughs because they talk about some position that seems so outrageous it makes them laugh a bit. So I think humanizing these big figures in philosophy give us an easier path to reading and understanding them.
Yeah, reading any analytic paper, analytic philosopher, it's harsh. It's rough. Like it's like sandpaper to your eyeballs. It's like
Okay, that's not nice.
but it is no. So I felt that way. I'm like, what am I looking at right now? Like this is just gibberish, dude. But you're totally right in saying just like look at them as a human, watch them as a human, watch them give a lecture, watch them talk in person. Um, and then it's a little less intimidating, a little less scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. On my ride over to college, I was listening to a Putnam lecture on mind, truth, and science. And if you ever read any of his readings, they're like really, really, really hard to get through because he like does this step by step order for a counterexample for, well, he's famous for attacking behaviorism.
Mhm.
And it's kind of difficult to follow him. Then you watch that interview and you're like, oh, he's just kind of speaking like your professor would.
I don't know if those type of people with that degree of brilliance, I don't know if they're just trying to dumb it down when they talk, and then their actual intellect is what's on the paper, or if it's just that's how they write or something like that.
Well, both Russell and, or I guess I shouldn't say both Russell and, but many analytic philosophers, from what I know, are actually very, very pro public philosophy. They want there to be public intellectuals. And Putnam defines people like Russell as a public intellectual. Putnam defines people like Sartre as public intellectuals. And the reason, we're analytics are calling towards this, hey, I want public intellectuals to be there, is because it allows for the youth to get into philosophy earlier. And a very big criticism of practical analytic philosophy that they have on like the world is that philosophy isn't usually offered in something like high school. And so by the time people kind of come to know what philosophy is, they actually seem to have this misunderstanding of it. And that's why, you have to explain to your parents what a philosophy major is even good for, Um, and, especially scientists, there's this notion among scientists that philosophy is, we don't need to do it anymore. But Russell had this conception that the second there is a definite answer for something in the empirical sciences, then science wants to take claim for it rather than philosophy. It no longer is philosophy if it's not problematic. And so I think that's a very interesting way to look at it.
And I also like this approach to his fundamental questions. Like he also said that philosophy is something that's continuously evolving, right? And you at that time you had Spinoza and others trying to contain it into a perfect system. And Russell, he kind of like contradicted that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's this kind of shift from the modern thinkers, Kant, Hegel, Spinoza, who create these great, massive systems where everything works like clockwork, to the emergence of both analytical and continental philosophy. They're no longer worried about those kinds of issues because they realized, I mean, if we're trying to attack everything at once, it seems like we're going to miss something. Um, so there's this kind of diffusal um, of philosophy to different kinds of thinkers, right? You have your logicians thinking about logic. You have your ethicists thinking about ethics, obviously, but you don't have a Kant anymore where you're thinking about aesthetics, morality, practicality, metaphysics, epistemology, all in the same book, because they kind of realize that kind of approach is so susceptible to mishaps. And if we attack things slowly, maybe we'll eventually get to there. And I think that's a very, very good characterization um, of the modern philosophers who kind of just thought everything should work in this one system. Because it seems to be a lot more nuanced than that.
I do agree that there's a lot more nuance to great systems or to big ideas, big concepts. And that it does make sense to some extent to attack things very particularly or very specifically, very narrowly. Like just trying to tackle one small problem properly. But I fear that just like if you look at a painting or like a piece of art, if you're zoomed in like that close, you're gonna lose a little bit of the meaning of the whole painting. You're gonna lose a little bit of the humanity. I don't know, like the I don't have a word for it. A little bit, you're gonna miss a little bit of the picture if you're always just being so narrow and so specific with stuff. But I understand that might be the best route we have if the goal is to understand stuff at the end of the day. If that's the goal, then that would probably be the appropriate approach to take.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, but if this painting analogy, if the painting were to represent all of reality, we can only look at such a small part of it, right? We're less than, we're like atom sized to all of reality, right? Maybe even less. Um, so to expect one specific atom to be able to understand an entire like painting, or one specific person to solve reality, then I mean I think that's nonsense. I think that's impossible.
I think that is impossible, but the goal wouldn't be for that atom to understand the entire painting. That's never going to happen. We're not gods.
Right.
Um, but what is possible is to appreciate all that the atom can see. The
I
atom can
agree.
see everything that it can see. I'm not saying it's absolutely everything, but everything that it can see, and appreciate everything that it can see instead of like being very narrow in what it looks like. I don't know. I feel like that feels more real, more human, more. I don't know. I don't have good words for that.
No, I mean that's a fair characterization. Um, and yeah, with that being said, I really appreciate that there is less of a systematic approach. There's definitely a scientific philosophy with analytic, but it's not something that attempts to solve everything at once anymore. Especially in analytic philosophy, you don't have these, I guess, 1,000-page books trying to solve the world. No offense, Kant, but it's more so about, hey, I want to say something about this issue. I'm going to publish a 10 to 40-page paper, hoping more people can build upon it.
Mhm.
And I think that approach works really well. We're all each little Legos putting our piece in to understand the world. And that also takes the burden off one person just doing everything.
Yeah, it's exactly like I was thinking in terms of Legos as well. Can add one little block. But that's it. We don't need to create a cathedral with 1,000 of them. We just need to add one properly. Make sure it sticks in right. Make sure it fits. Yeah. Anything else that should be said about going back to Russell that I've missed out on or that I haven't
Oh,
talked about enough or haven't gone over enough?
we
I,
can.
I wasn't here, but I recall he said that Plato's forms is like rubbish, but I don't know like further proofs. So what was your thoughts on it? If you're familiar with it.
Yeah,
Um.
or Ori, go for it. You can answer.
So I. Yeah, no, he definitely is anti-Plato's forms, but in my opinion, from what I've read from his history of philosophy and outline of philosophy, he mischaracterizes Plato. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with Plato's forms of the middle period, how, you're taught Plato. But he kind of seems to fall in line with this idea of a form when he talks about universals, which are just basically these concepts. Um, so, opening up history of philosophy, it almost seems like he's strawmanning a lot of the philosophers that he's giving a history of. And that's true for more than just Plato. Um, so yeah, a big thing that I would think for him is that he needs to relax. He is kind of very. I hate saying this because I love him, but he's very against other philosophers because he wants to be the big dog. That don't 100% agree with him, and Plato is quite the person not to disagree with. But we wouldn't have. I mean, I'd argue we wouldn't have Bertrand Russell with no Plato, because I mean his theory of ideas are strictly what gave us the concept of a universal. We didn't
Yeah,
kind of have that with the pre-Socratics.
they're very different in the sense that like Plato was of the idea that we could come to hard hard for sure truths, non-empirical ones, attack them with or grab onto them with reason or with soul if you want to call it that. But then Bertrand Russell kind of goes a different route and says, "No, no, no, we understand the world through our senses, through how we observe stuff, through empirical accounts." Um he thinks that like that truths or knowledge I mean he thinks that knowledge is like a probabilistic thing, like it comes in degrees. Things can be more true or less true, and that I don't think Plato would like that. You would think that there are.
I mean, I disagree. I think now this is definitely semi-contentious, but I think that Plato's entire project, we need to remember, starts from perception.
Mhm.
We can't get to knowledge without having a perception that we need to go investigate. For Plato, when we see something that we characterize as beautiful, and then we see something else that seems to be completely contradictory to the first thing, characterize that as beautiful also, our soul gets confused. And then we have to go investigate. Our soul has to go investigate, right? And that's kind of the process in the Republic. And he doesn't think that process is wrong, and he maintains it in his late period. He just kind of puts a lot more respect on perception in the late period. But
But I wouldn't say
he kind of tells us.
perception's not a necessary thing though for reason to stand alone. Or investigation or anything like that. I feel like that there's a complete difference in terms of mind, soul, reason, whatever you want to call it, and our attacking of it, or what we kind of throw back at it. But it's like a standalone thing, in my mind. It doesn't need perceptions. Reason can exist without perceptions, but maybe perceptions can't exist without reason, type of thing.
I think they exist without each other, but they inform each other, as both for Plato and for Russell.
Cool point. I'll think about that one. You know, I feel like I've thought
Um,
about Plato too much in the past couple of years. I kind of want to move on to Russell.
I'll No, I see what you're saying. But last thing that I'd want to say about this is think of it in this way, right? We'll have seemingly logical conclusions, say about, I guess, just take deduction, right? Something that seems deductively valid, so logical. In the empirical world, we end up disproving, like, while it is logical, it's not sound. It would only be something that's sound if it aligns with our perceptions, and also vice versa for perception. We'd see something that is, um, it seems like I'm actually looking at it, but then dreams exist or hallucinations exist, and then we kind of walk into this realm of almost, I don't know. I'm hesitant to call it logical invalidity, but maybe if you go into inductive logic, then it would be almost this invalid thing or highly improbable thing. So I do think that it's hard to really separate the two. While they are two things that are standalone, to work well, they each need to communicate with each other.
They're tied together for sure, but they're independent things in my mind at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Interesting. What else do I have to say about Russell? What else do I know about Russell? He had
So
really
real.
cool. Oh, I forgot. I'd have to dig it up in my textbook, but this type of theory of, I don't know, could have been a reference or something like that. But there was a really cool thought experiment that he talks about that I might bring up in the next book club. But yeah, I forget. I can't put my mind to it right now. Anything else?
We need JJ here. He knows all about
Is he?
Russell's theory of reference.
Yeah.
He just wrote a paper on it.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, we'll bring JJ in. We need some Russellians in here, because to be quite honest, I'm underread on him. I've only read excerpts and then like learned about him in passing in courses. I've never taken a proper course or anything like that with Russell. I'm very uneducated when it comes to that.
Yeah, a lot of mine is like I've been taught about him in survey courses rather than strictly a Russell course, but I've done a lot of self-reading because he interested me a lot.
Analytic
He's
philosophy is
quite the
turning me
guy.
off. like it turns me off when it comes to like for fun reading. It's not a I don't know, I don't get much pleasure. It's not easy. Let's just put it that way. It's not easy for me. Maybe it's just
Yeah.
because I'm not bright
No, I
enough,
agree.
but
Nah, don't say that.
but difficult.
But yeah, it's not like something you can take to the beach. You know what I mean? But hard work of philosophy never is.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that Russell is at least the outline is a great starting point
Mhm.
for an introduction to all of philosophy, whether or not you agree with it.
Yeah. I see a couple more people joined up now. As we're nearing the end. Hi Chiro. Hi Nathan.
Because you need to update it. It says an hour. It starts now because of the hour time
Oh,
shift.
fair. Yeah, I totally forgot that there was a daylight savings or whatever. Oh well, I guess people can watch. The 7 people that attend will watch the recordings. But yeah, I don't know. In this book club so far for Nathan and Chiro, we just talked about how Russell wanted to bring philosophy, or he wanted to systematize philosophy or make it clear. He wanted to make it proper. He wanted to bring it to public, to people, for them to see, to come to truths. Um, he wanted to eliminate ambiguity. Let's say, let's call it that. Resolve confusion. At least those are the biggest takes I get from his life's works. And then he gets very nitty and gritty with rejecting Euclidean geometry and all that stuff. Russell's opinion on whether water is wet. What would Russell say about water is wet? I think he would denote that
You would
he would say that's true, right? He'd give that a truth value.
no.
No?
I mean, he would give it a true. I more so think he would call it like just an illogical approach. You can't kind of give it a. You can't give something a quality of that it gives other things, right? Like you can't give a liquid a quality of being wet if liquid is something that makes things wet.
It might just be an improper statement, like saying
Yeah, exactly.
a round square, you know? Maybe that's what he would say. A round square. How can we talk? But that goes back to the discussion we were having earlier. Like to me, it just seems so weird that we can mention things like Pegasus or round squares, but them not exist and not be real in any way. That makes me grit my teeth. That doesn't make sense. How are we talking about something that doesn't exist? I'm speaking it into existence. It exists. Pegasus, see?
Maybe it doesn't exist empirically would be a better way to say it.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe you can say it doesn't ontologically exist, but it metaphysically exists. I don't know. That bugs me a lot. That keeps me up at night.
I don't think that a non-empirical existence denies an ontological existence. Considering ontology, if you believe in abstract entities, then it would still have an ontological existence, right?
Does an abstract entity have ontological existence? Good question. I'll just
According to, I mean, anyone who believes in abstract entities, they would say yes, because that would be part of their ontology.
mm-hmm. I don't have an opinion or a good side to take on that on that thought. I don't know if the number 1 is out there. I don't know if the number 1 exists in any.
Okay, nominalist.
I'm just figuring stuff out, Ori. I'm still figuring stuff out. I'm confused. I'm confused and afraid. Do numbers exist? What would Plato say? Plato would say they do exist in the realm of forms, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, no, they're at least in the middle period. They're right before the realm of forms.
Okay. What do you say they're
And
ontologically real?
absolutely,
Yeah. Okay.
all of everything for Plato is
Ontology.
real,
Yeah.
except for what is not. The only thing that isn't is what is not. Like the only thing that isn't real.
Yeah. Does he
And
does
I
he
think that's kind of tautological.
does he make a claim on, or does he just like distinguish uh something being metaphysically real and ontologically real, or do we just kind of group it together?
I think that I don't know. Maybe I'm not understanding you correctly, but I think you'd make a mistake if you're saying something is on, like, if it's ontologically real, it exists. Ontology is kind of makes a statement about what kinds of things exist. Um, and so I don't think that, how do I put it? Ontology would be the biggest circle. Um, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, no, okay. I don't know, intuitively metaphysics seems bigger than ontology, or at least like
Well,
it
ontology.
it grabs more. It has longer tentacles.
Well, if you go by that way, then you would have to make the statement, like, if you were um, a theist, then you would have to make the statement that God isn't ontologically real, and that would be very problematic.
Mm-hmm. You have to say he's real in a certain way or in a certain sense. Hmm. Ontology is just a name given to what was given to metaphysics when metaphysics became broader in the modern period. Huh. True. Metaphysics
Mm,
and ontology were more or less the same in the classical period. So okay.
yeah, that sounds about right.
Interesting, yeah.
I would, if you want to kind of figure out a analytic approach, you should definitely read the essay on What There Is by Quine.
I've read that one, yeah.
And yeah, so I think that explains ontology well.
Yeah, that was like the first. Those were the Quine, Kripke, Carnap. Those metaphysicians. They were like the first. They were my first university course, metaphysics. Terrible decision.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Terrible, terrible decision. They were throwing out symbolic logic left, right, center, and I was like, "What is happening?"
Yeah, bro, they hit me with the modal logic, and I'm like, dog, can we do regular shit first? Like,
Every time I walked out of that lecture, my brain was like this. I was like, "What is?"
dude, I was a stoner back then. Like, I didn't know what the fuck to do, but shit, it worked out.
That's
Now I'm
funny.
here.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm gonna wrap up the recording now, or unless anyone has final things to say about Russell, before we get started on the proper reading or proper topics. Nice, sweet, recording done.